Tony Blair, in the middle of the Labour leadership camp in 2015, you said of people voting for Jeremy Corbyn, if their heart says vote for Corbyn, well, get a transplant. Were you relieved that Labour didn't get elected?
No, I wasn't relieved that Labour didn't get elected because I would, despite everything, I was passionately opposed to the re-election of Boris Johnson. But the fact is we were never going to be elected, not with this leadership and not with these ideas. It was just never going to happen.
So with this leadership and these ideas, you wouldn't have wanted a Labour government to be elected because they weren't the ideas of the leadership that you backed?
Yes, but on the issue of Brexit, look, I didn't want a Brexit general election. I begged people, do not give the Tories a Brexit general election. Boris Johnson was locked in a box and we handed him the key to get out of the box. I voted Labour and I wanted to do everything I could to stop Brexit. But anyway, that's history.
But you did spend 4 years undermining Jeremy Corbyn.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Yes, you did.
No, come on. I disagree with him in the same way that he, by the way, disagreed with me when I was Labour leader.
But you were saying he was a risk to the country.
I think a lot of the policies and politics that he represented was a real problem for the country. Yes, I think the anti-Western attitude is a real problem for the country. Having said that, the bigger risk in this election, which I stated very clearly, was the election of a Conservative government committed to Brexit and committed potentially to a no-deal Brexit. But, you know, there's no point in people trying to... I mean, look, the one thing that really would be bizarre is to blame me for the election defeat. This was a defeat of not just an individual, and I've got nothing against Jeremy Corbyn as a person. It was a defeat of an ideology. And if we don't understand that and reflect on the massive gap between where we are and where the British people are, we're not going to get back.
But if you look actually at where the rot started, some would say, you know, there's a Guardian poll in 2007 about you. You were too concerned with spin, you were out of touch with Britain, you weren't trustworthy, you were insincere. One of the things that was said was that Labour, right back then, took the North for granted even then, through globalisation and everything else. I went to Wakefield and people said, Labour doesn't work for us. It hasn't worked for us. Do you take responsibility for that?
I don't take responsibility for losing the Labour heartlands because we didn't. In 2005, my majority in Sedgefield was 20,000.
How did you feel about Sedgefield this time?
Terrible. Of course, terrible. Because, by the way, a Tory government will do nothing for the people there. Right? The majority in 2005 in Bolsover, Dennis Skinner's seat, was 18,000. We didn't lose the Labour heartlands. And yes, of course, look, in 2007, I've been in power 10 years. We've been through many, many difficult things, including Iraq, Afghanistan, 9/11, tuition fees. If you come to after your third election and people decide we want to change, it would be odd if people didn't want to change. But you know, we're not talking in the context of Labour having won 3 elections. We're talking in the context of Labour having just lost 4.
But you can talk about the economy and everything else, but of these 60 seats that Labour lost, 52 were seats that Labour voters had voted leave because they believed that their best bet was outside the European Union. But you were going in Europe, round the capitals, in a way undermining that democratic decision of these Labour voters.
Right, so this is an argument I really do take very seriously, which is that people like myself, by insisting on continuing the argument around Brexit, caused us a problem in those Labour heartlands. And I don't discount it at all, but I'd say 2 things in respect of it. The first is that you can't unite the country over Brexit. Boris Johnson understands this, by the way. Brexit is a Tory project. What he decided is you can't unite the country over Brexit, do it, and then try and move on. From my perspective, because I believe so passionately against Brexit and think it will do nothing for these communities, my view is you had to do everything you can to get the decision back before the British people, and you would then have to find other ways of dealing with the underlying anxieties that drove this Brexit vote.
But the Labour voters in those 52 seats didn't agree with you.
Well, hang on. This is the important point. I believe if you'd had the right strategy from the beginning, if you'd said, look, we accept the result, the government's now got a mandate to negotiate an agreement, but we reserve the right, if this deal is not a good deal, to put it back before the British people. I promise you, the majority of people in constituencies like mine would have listened to that argument. If we'd simply become a Leave party, what would have happened to all those other seats we've got? What would have happened to the fact that the bulk of our members were passionately anti-Brexit.
You talk about moving the Labour Party forward. Alan Johnson, trenchant Alan Johnson, said, the working class have always been a big disappointment to John Landsman of Momentum and his cult. I want them out of the party. Go back to your student politics. Is he right? Do you want Momentum out?
Well, I think he is absolutely right in saying that the far left that has taken over the Labour Party, if they remain in a position of authority, if they're in charge of the Labour Party going forward, the Labour Party, I think, is finished.
The Labour Party is finished. So you want Momentum out?
It's not a question so much of expelling people, it's a question of taking the Labour Party back for what I would call sensible mainstream Labour politics. And that includes, by the way, a traditional left of the Labour Party. But that traditional left that stands in the shoes of Nye Bevan, Michael Foot, Neil Kinnock, John Prescott, that is a different left from these guys.
That's old. That's gone. I mean, you look at the unions now and you say, well, the big union leaders, are they actually in touch with what the working class want now?
Of course not. They're not, a lot of them. I mean, the ones that are, by the way, like the one private
Len
sector...
McCluskey, really, is he in touch?
No, I think he's not, because these are the people who talk about the working class, but don't ignore what they're saying to them. But if you take the one private sector union that has done well in these past 20 years, which is Usdaw, that's the one they tend not to listen to.
Coming on to the last section now, I mean, it will not escape your notice that Labour had its most disastrous result in Scotland. A lower share of the vote since 1910, Scott's last Antarctic visit, according to one commentator. One Labour MP.
Yeah, no, I know, of course, and it's a ridiculous situation. And the reason for it is that we went sort of left and nationalist when it was perfectly obvious what we had to do was be strongly supportive of the union and in a centre-left position.
Well, Nicola Sturgeon is requesting a second referendum on Scottish independence. She will apply for Section 30 to Westminster. Should Westminster grant that?
I would do everything I could to resist this, but I think we've got to recognise one thing, which is that unless you revive an alternative form of politics to the SNP, you're going to be in a lot of difficulty.
Now, that's going to be a long-term affair, whatever you do. And Nicola Sturgeon is wanting a referendum next year.
Yeah,
is it her democratic right to ask, Scotland's democratic right, given the result, to have that?
Well, it's a democratic right to ask for it, but I don't think we should accede to it. No.
So you agree with Boris Johnson then?
Well, I'm not agreeing with Boris Johnson. I've always taken the position I'm against another referendum in Scotland unless it becomes absolutely manifestly clear that it's the settled will of the Scottish people and so on and so forth.
Is 48 SNP MPs not settled enough for you?
Well, I think if you add up all the people in opposition to it, it's not, actually. I think in any event, we've got Brexit to get through. I don't think you want to put another whole lot of uncertainty on the United Kingdom at this present time.
I mean, I know you've been asked who you would like to see lead the party, and you haven't said, but we're in a situation where...
Wouldn't be very wise, would it?
Well, you're a former Prime Minister, is not an unreasonable question to ask.
No, it's an absolutely reasonable question to ask.
Do you actually think perhaps it should be a woman? You're the only party that's never had a female leader. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, there's a great case for it, provided that whether it's a woman or a man, they're in the right political position to win.
If one was to believe in that manifesto that was put forward at this election and then became leader, as in Rebecca Long-Bailey, would that be the right direction for the party?
No, if we keep the same politics that has just led to this catastrophic defeat, it wouldn't matter whether the person's a woman or not. They're not going to win, because it's just been rejected. And really, of course, it would be a great thing if the Labour Party had a woman leader. But the most important thing is that you have a leader with the politics that can allow us to win an election, because otherwise we're just a bunch of talkers. We're not doing anything.
One final thing. Lord Faulkner said there is molten anger. Are you angrier than you've ever been since you left power? I've come to the conclusion in politics that anger is a redundant emotion. I am more motivated than I've ever been since leaving power, because I really do believe we've just made a disastrous mistake for the country about its future, which is Brexit. And believe me, in time it will be seen to be a terrible mistake. We're going to have to make it work now, but it's a terrible mistake. And the Labour Party, by its self-indulgence, and that's what it was in the end, was the effective handmaiden of Brexit.
It's not our fault, because the fault is with those who advocated it, but our combination of misguided ideology and utter incompetence allowed it to happen. And yeah, that should be motivating. You can get angry as you like, but the most important thing is now to make the changes necessary so that you can have a government that can command support amongst the British people and can govern with basic social democratic values. It's perfectly possible to do. There's nothing wrong with Labour's values, by the way. The values are perfectly sensible. But its politics has got to be modern, engaged with the future, and realistic.
Thank you very much, Tony Blair.
Thank you.